Hey Alex, how you doing, my friend?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm very well. What time is it over in? Are you in Vancouver?
Yeah, it's about nine in the morning.
9 in the morning, nice and fresh. Have you
Yeah,
had your hydrogen water this morning?
I just did like 10 minutes ago. So
Okay.
just had it right before this call.
I always have mine. Like people normally drink normal water, and sometimes people say put some lime in water or lemon in water. But I always have hydrogen water. I've been doing that for a few years now. Sorry, is it making a lot of noise? One, two. It's kind of
No,
that might be better.
yeah, might be my chair too. If you're hearing, uh, my chair started squeaking earlier this week.
I don't hear it. It sounds okay.
Okay.
Sounds all right. So, Alex, you are the CEO of Drink HRW, founder. How
Yep.
would you position yourself?
Yeah, I'm no longer the CEO. I stepped down from that role a few years ago,
Okay.
just to focus more on the licensing side with the hydrogen tablets and also with working with the various like professors and universities around the world.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm the founder of Drink HRW. I'm the inventor of the hydrogen tablets. And I work with the Drink HRW Scientific Advisory Board in helping them launch new products.
Right.
So anything that they launch because they're still using me as a founder, I have to sign off on the product along with the rest of their scientific advisory board.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, hydrogen water is like what started the company off. Is that right? And
Yeah, the reason
Mhm.
that the company started is, when I was starting to invent the hydrogen tablet, I didn't know that there was going to be demand from a lot of other supplement companies wanting to license my technology. So I
Mhm.
started it off with the Drink HRW brand. And then immediately I started getting a lot of interest from a lot of other brands in the space, wanting to white label the technology. But none of them sold to Canada, which is where I'm from, right?
Mhm.
So I kept the Drink HRW brand alive to distribute the product throughout Canada. Then I added a couple other niche products that I really wanted that weren't available on the market, like the ageless defense, right? That really
Mhm.
nobody, talks about glycation and stuff like that. Um, and the brand started growing a little bit, and then they started growing more into the US. But when the brand started growing more into the US, into other markets, uh, I started working on solutions to step down from the brand so that I'm not engaging in a big conflict of interest with all my other customers by competing with them.
Uh,
So I divested some of my shares, brought in some, other shareholders and team members, and stepped back from the CEO role. But at that time, uh, I didn't want my name to be attached, even if I didn't have an active role, so I could focus on the licensing and white labeling side of the business. I didn't want my name attached to any products that I wouldn't recommend.
yeah,
So
yeah.
kind of in my exit, because I'm just a minority owner now, in my exit from CEO and majority owner, the operating agreement has that they cannot launch any product unless I sign off
Which is
and
good.
say this is,
Because I like the way you do a lot of research on any products which is under the Drink HRW umbrella. So
yes.
the first product, the hydrogen water, I mean, I've known of hydrogen water probably maybe about 6 years now. I don't know how long it's been going on, but what made you initially start and think, hey, do you know what? I want to launch a hydrogen water product.
Huh. So I'll try and keep the long story as brief as possible. But going back about 10 years ago, I was in a completely different, business. And the business I was in allowed me a lot of free time and a lot of freedom. I'd say travel about a week a month, and I'd work 100 hours a week the week I was on the road visiting with customers. But while I was home, I was only working an hour or two a day, right? Prepping for my next trip. That gave me time to train like a pro athlete would. I was training about 6 hours a day, doing 2 to 3 trains 4 times a week, couple days of lighter trains as active recovery days that would now be bigger than my whole workout, right? Um,
As
you
well.
know, um, and I was just going on living my life, enjoying that. Like it was mostly between CrossFit and martial arts was the bulk of my training, but a lot of hiking and sprinting and stuff like that as well. Um, I got really sick with the mystery virus, and they don't know exactly what it was. They just believed I had a virus, but overnight I developed central nervous system fatigue, so I could no longer jump an inch off the ground. I went from a 54-inch plyometric box jump to couldn't get airtime jumping. I went from being able to do 20 bar muscle ups unbroken to couldn't do a chest to bar, but none of my heavy lifts were affected. So my strength wasn't affected. My deadlift was unaffected, my bench press, my squat. It was just anything explosive.
Mm,
I also had sudden onset narcolepsy. So if I sat down for more than a minute or so and wasn't engaged in something, I'd just conk out and fall asleep. Right. I was
right.
sleeping like 16 hours a day. And my inflammation was about 100 times abnormal. So my C-reactive proteins were, like 34 milligrams a liter, right? So like
Wow.
just out of this world high. And I was also severely anemic and iron deficient, despite eating at that time 6 to 8,000 calories a day to sustain my training with a lot of red meat and green vegetables. Like at that time, I bought a freezer and had a whole freezer full of a grass-fed, grass-finished cow, right? So I was eating beef almost daily, eating like one of the big crates of spinach daily and other vegetables, and still somehow was iron deficient and anemic. So something was really wrong, and that lasted for a couple months. And when the dust finally settled, and my inflammation went down a little bit lower, still like 10 times abnormal, but lower. I was left with polyarthritis. So I developed osteoarthritis in 11 different joints, right? The worst of which was my shoulder. So at that time, the doctor I was working with, going to um, put me on 1,000 milligrams of naproxen a day. So naproxen is Aleve. If you guys have Aleve in the UK, um, it's a competitor to like Advil, but it's a different molecule. They're both non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs.
Right,
So you
right.
usually do 200 milligrams of Aleve. I was doing 1,000. So I was doing 5 times the normal dose and like a prescription strength of this. And I was getting cortisone injections, into my joints to try and remain somewhat active. I just knew it wasn't a forever solution. So all
Mm.
that time I'd spent training, I was just spending on PubMed. I was just reading study after study, looking for anything that could help regulate the inflammatory response.
Wouldn't
You
you
know,
say, sorry, quickly, like you was
yeah,
training quite aggressively. I'm surely that's got a heavy reason for that inflammation, wouldn't you say?
possibly, but at that time I was not really a biohacker, or not conscious of doing testing, and nor was it available 10 years ago,
Right.
right? So I didn't have any baseline information to go off of. It would definitely not have been 100 times abnormal, even with all that training.
Yeah.
Um,
So you was on
but
PubMed.
yeah, I was on PubMed. I was looking for anything that could help regulate the inflammatory response. I incorporated quite a number of things, everything, various supplements. I was going to cryotherapy chambers, and doing a ton of stuff. And I found some research on hydrogen, and so I bought a machine to make hydrogen water for like $5,000, and I just went on my merry way. Um, about 9 months after, I fainted in the gym a few times. So what had happened is the high dose of naproxen had led to multiple ulcers, and I wasn't processing my nutrition properly,
Right.
right? So I had to completely stop the naproxen cold turkey, and all my joints froze like a few days later. Like I couldn't
Mm.
put on socks, I couldn't put on a shirt, right? Um, just my inflammation skyrocketed back up. And by the way, for context now, when I do my Cyfox testing, every 1 to 2 months, my HSCRP is below the detection limit of zero
Okay.
point 0.2. So,
Point.
like, yeah. So it's down a long ways,
Mm,
right?
very.
Um, so basically, um, I realized that none of what I was doing was working, because only the naproxen seemed to have been working for my inflammation with my joints seizing up like that. Um, something like cryotherapy, I'd go and I'd feel a little bit better for like an hour, right? And then it would come back. So,
Mm.
and I think I was paying like $60 a session. So $60 for an hour of relief just wasn't cutting it.
Yeah.
Um, and I went back to PubMed and I was desperate again, just scouring, for more articles again. And I happened upon more studies on hydrogen, which kind of pissed me off because I had this $5,000 machine and it wasn't helping me at all. But it just dawned on me, how do I know that this is making hydrogen? And what dose of hydrogen am I getting? How are the researchers making hydrogen? So I started buying the full papers, right, to read the materials and methods.
Mm.
And literally none of the clinical trials used the machine like I bought. They
Right.
are all using different methods, either bubbling gas through water or using the element magnesium. And so then I found a reagent to test for hydrogen gas. And I ordered the reagent and it was below the detection limit, right? The amount of H2 coming out of the machine. I had to triple the input to reduce a drop. So the level was about 0.03 parts per million, is what the $5,000 machine was producing.
Wow. Okay.
So just a tiny fraction of the lowest ever concentration that's ever shown any effect at all.
For
Let
a
alone,
machine.
uh, the lowest, ever observed physiological effect from hydrogen, it is still perhaps hundreds of times lower than the optimal, dose and concentration for various things. So, and it was, 1/16th of the lowest ever, so like thousands of times lower than likely what the optimal dose is for certain things. So that actually gave me a bit of hope. Aside from pissing me off, I contacted that company. Um, they basically told me they don't guarantee hydrogen levels, and the fact that I was able to detect it shows it's more than tap water. So I'm getting what I paid for it,
Uh,
right? Because it's not regulated, right? They're
yeah.
not lying. There is hydrogen in the water. It's minuscule and not therapeutic, but
It's
it's one of those
present.
marketing loopholes. And I
Yeah.
know we're going to get into this later, but it's one of the big issues with the hydrogen water industry is all the marketers just call it hydrogen water, but dosing from product to product can differ by hundreds of times,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I went down a long road of trying to make my own hydrogen water. You know, First I was trying to source the magnesium and to end up getting this commercial and to use proper sources, pharmaceutical grade magnesium in the US, which is controlled by the US State Department and overseen by the Department of Defense, right? And not allowed for export, in its raw form without, export, certification, which I got to make it at first in Canada, but it took about a year and a background check, and there was like 34 stages, and they had to come up to Vancouver and visit with me and visit, tour the facility. It was a whole thing. So at
Mm-mm.
the start, I wasn't going to go through that, and I found sources in China and Eastern Europe. So there's only a few countries in the world that can produce the magnesium that we
Mm.
need, the elemental magnesium in the right particle shape and size. Russia, China, the US, basically. Um,
Right.
I found sources from China and Eastern Europe, and it was concerning because they came and they were labeled like silver paint powder,
Wow.
right? Which I learned is because they were illegal for export, they weren't allowed to be sending them out of the country. But I started trying to make concoctions, and I realized that the powder one floated, and there were certain reasons why it wouldn't react. So I started mixing it with acids and compressing it into a tablet. And I started doing some reading about
1 minute. So was you just doing this in your house? Like, how was you
Yeah,
doing
in my
this?
kitchen. Yeah, in my kitchen. I'm an insane person. You know, like I am yeah, when I get on a subject, I'm like a pit bull, I don't let go. Right. I just
Right.
keep going down the world. I get really obsessed. Um, so I was actually reading and learning about pharmaceutical formulation just to learn how to compress tablets. And I bought this little hand press, that I was marketed, I think, to make hash or something like that to compress. But
Right.
like it basically I was funneling it in and holding this pipe with the stopper and hitting it with a hammer, right, to make these tablets. So I was able to compress them to get them to sink so they go to the bottom. And I was sealing them in bottles at this time, and I was getting about 3 parts per million. And I was drinking several liters of this a day, so I was getting, like between 6 to 12 liters of hydrogen, or 6 to 12 milligrams of H2 a day. And in 9 or 10 days, all my joints loosened, right? And I
Oh,
started feeling pretty good. And I thought, wow, you know, there could be something to this. Um,
sorry, quickly.
yeah,
The what was you compressing together?
the powders. So basically, all the powders, including the magnesium, they all float, right?
Mm.
So if you just put them on top of a water bottle, they're floating at the surface and they're reacting at the surface, and the hydrogen will just go out. So it needs to be compressed to fall to the bottom so that the hydrogen passes through the water and
Oh
dissolves
my
into.
God, wow. And what was the powders that you experimented with?
Yeah, at the time I was using, I don't think I was using dextrose yet. I don't know what was I using? I was using mannitol, I think, trying lactose, various other binding agents,
Right.
and just at the time I think I was just using citric acid, you know,
Okay.
um, along with it because it was the cheapest and easiest to get.
And where does the
Uh,
hydrogen come into it?
the magnesium reacts with the water, and the acids help catalyze the reaction, and the hydrogen comes off the H2O. Right?
Okay.
So, and then the elemental magnesium, first it becomes magnesium hydroxide, but hydroxide is a function of pH. Magnesium hydroxide is milk of magnesium. So you take it for, constipation and stuff like that.
Right.
But hydroxide's a function of pH, and we're using sufficient acids in the tablet. So the hydroxide gets buffered down and it just leaves Mg2 plus.
Mhm.
So that's free magnesium ions. That's the exact form we need magnesium to be to get into our cells, right?
Okay.
So the issue with magnesium supplementation is usually magnesium salts aren't that bioavailable because your stomach has to break the salt apart to get the Mg2 plus. But the reaction to make the hydrogen leaves it in Mg2 plus, so your stomach doesn't have to do any work. So it's completely
Mm.
bioavailable. But yeah, so I was pressing these tablets by hand, and all my joints loosened, and I just thought to myself, you know, there's something here, but I'm getting this sketchy powder coming in that I got like samples from, Eastern Europe and China labeled improperly. And I'm like, I better test this stuff for heavy metals, right? And of course, because I hadn't done enough research yet, and these were, used for military grade stuff, they were contaminated with heavy metals. So I knew, okay, this I can't keep doing this every day, right? I'm gonna get sick, Doing it for a couple weeks is fine, but every day for the rest of my life is no bueno. I
Of course.
can't do this. I went down the research. I went and researched the industry, and I found out there was pharmaceutical grades that seem to only be in the US. They use them for implants, this grade of magnesium. So like you put a screw in, a magnesium metal screw, and it reacts with your blood and dissolves away, and it actually helps healing. They think it's because of the magnesium, but it's probably because of the hydrogen too. So there's quite a few clinical trials of using these biodegradable magnesium screws as implants. So I found that source, and they were able to process it to what I needed. But that was down the road. And at the start, in addition to the heavy metals, I'm like, is there any other toxic byproducts that are being made that I need to worry about? Like, I know enough about the chemistry to make this tablet, but I'm not a chemist,
Mm.
right? So I found my founding partner, and he's a PhD in organic chemistry. He works in the pharmaceutical industry, developing molecules, for drug targets. He's actually from the UK as well, originally from
Oh.
Southampton, but
Mm.
I tried to hire him as a consultant, and at first he told me it was the worst pseudoscience he'd ever heard in his life, right?
Seriously.
And he gave me all these reasons why, hydrogen is inert in the body, and even if it had a therapeutic effect, it would be better to inhale it and not drink it. And so I was up to date with the research well enough to rebut everything he said, and I showed him all the physiological effects of clinical trials, of preclinical trials, all that, or I showed him quite a number of them. And I showed him comparative trials showing that the raises in cellular concentration are often higher from drinking hydrogen water than inhaling, even when you're inhaling at 100 or hundreds of times higher dosages of H2. So
Mm.
it piqued his interest, and he said, well, perhaps there's, enough evidence to use this as a supplement, right? Which he said in a bit of a derogatory way because he's from the pharmaceutical industry. And he's like, I'll take a look at your work. And I just kept on sending him new papers every day as he was reviewing what I'd done. And serendipitously, I sent him a paper on a certain disease model that hydrogen showed great effects in phase 2 clinical trial. And he called me and asked if I'd meet him for lunch, right? And he had printed out the paper, and he said, "Listen, this paper, right? The rest of the papers, I just have to accept the conclusions because I'm not a subject matter expert on them. I have to look at their methodology and accept the conclusions. But this paper that he was currently working on small molecules, you know, to target this disease state, right?
Oh.
And he said, I wish our results were as good as this, right? He said, unless this is fraud, this stuff works, right?
Right.
And he said, are you sure that you just want this as a do-it-yourself project and that you don't want to commercialize? He's like, I've done some internet searching. There's not really anything in the market. And it gave me, pause to consider. And I decided to go for it. It took us like a year, few thousand iterative adjustments on the formulation, 15 failed scale up attempts.
Wow.
Finally, we got our first production ready tablet going. I made connections with all the universities. So now we have 20 plus clinical trials. This has just been a many year process of just refining. We have like 5,000 more, iterative adjustments to our formula or procedure to make the tablets since that first production ready. So I said I'd keep the long story short, but I think I kept it long.
But that's amazing though. Like, sometimes it takes that, isn't it? Like, you go for a certain thing in your life and it just leads you on to investigate how to just do something else. Like whether it's it could be anything. Like in this case, it's like, I'm tired of this inflammation. I need to get rid of it. You done some research, you found out about hydrogen, and you started to do a little experiment yourself. I'm just fascinated by it, and to the point where you've been able to get a better ppm from your own home experiment than a 5 grand machine.
Oh yeah, and that it was 100 times better at that time. And
100
now
times
in
better.
500 milliliters of water, the tablets are getting over 12 parts per million. So it's 4 times better and an easier process than those first ones I was making. So yeah, it's that comes down to it though. Those machines make a tremendous amount of hydrogen, but the bubbles are too big, so they don't dissolve very well. Like if you take a lighter and put it to the nozzle, the hydrogen burns. The lighter flickers and, the hydrogen burns, right, as it's coming out. That means it's not in the water, right?
Right.
So
Okay.
it comes down to the dissolution kinetics that the smaller the bubble you create, the more likely it's to dissolve in water. And with the tablets, we're going so small that it doesn't even have to dissolve. Because when you go small enough, it just stays, you know, in solution, not dissolved, but just forming eddy currents, and it doesn't dissipate. It's the same thing with the, small molecules that you know, companies will use in formulation. Like it's widely known in the formulation industry, you don't need an ingredient to be water soluble if you can micronize it or get it into the nano or the small micron range. Because
Hmm.
if you get it below 5 microns, it neither sinks nor floats. It just forever stays in suspension. This was the same thing during the pandemic. When we realized social distancing wasn't working because the small, viral particulates were staying in the air for hours or days and traveling all sorts of distance, it's because they were smaller than 5 microns, right? So
Hmm.
they'd never sink or float away. They were just flowing, until they hit something,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So that's kind of what we figured out with the tablets is how to make very, very small bubbles. And that's that white cloud that we make. And
Mm.
that's what sets us apart from other technologies because no other technology currently is capable to do what we're doing, making
Let's
the very small molecules.
we'll get into that in a second, but let's quickly talk about the benefits. Why should a person have hydrogen water anyway? What's good about
So
hydrogen water?
so think of hydrogen sort of like exercise for your mitochondria, right? So hydrogen is something called a mitohormetic effector. So it's a hormetic stress for your mitochondria. Now, hormesis, those are adaptive stressors that, we've evolved to anticipate, throughout all of human and before human life for billions of years. So think exercise, cold exposure, heat exposure, even radiation, even ethanol, right, are all hormetic stressors. Um, Now, some of them, they all operate on something called a reverse J curve. So, like if you have no exercise, you're unhealthy. You get a little bit of exercise, you're healthy. And then exercise will have a very long plateau. And then if you
Hmm.
exercise too much, you go back to unhealthy. Alcohol, it's like this, right? Like the window to get it right is so narrow, which is why it's almost always bad for
Hmm.
people. Um, but hydrogen is sort of the same way. Now, hydrogen has actually been with us since the very beginning of evolution, since before mitochondria. So our mitochondria evolved from eukaryotes, which expelled H2 gas. And eukaryotes formed by a symbiotic relationship between two organelles, one which consumed H2 gas. So H2 has been with us for two steps before mitochondria, before the first mitochondria. Now since then, in the last couple billion years, there's been times when hydrogen was much more abundant in the atmosphere, so much so it was dissolved in water. So the oldest water sources we found in the planet, like 2 billion years old, deep down beneath the Canadian Shield, still have dissolved hydrogen gas in the water, but none of the surface water today does. Um,
Hmm.
but what's more important is we evolved to produce hydrogen endogenously, right? So we produce hydrogen by fermenting non-nutritive carbohydrates like fibers, right? And
Yeah.
throughout the majority of human evolution, up until modern times, humans would consume 100 to 150 grams of dietary fiber a day,
And
right?
we know this for
Now,
sure.
oh yeah, I mean it's well documented in the research that would have been our diet. Now today, the average person consumes 10 to 15 grams of dietary fiber a day. So, you know,
Big difference.
yeah, a huge difference. But the average person on like a standard American diet will consume 1 to 3 grams of dietary fiber a day, right? Um,
Okay.
Even vegans would have a really hard time getting to the 100 to 150 grams because through horticulture for the last several thousand years, we've done everything in our power to strip fiber from all our foods,
Mhm.
right? Because fiber makes it really hard to eat things, right? Actually, there's some cool research that indicates that the problems we have with crooked teeth are because we don't consume enough fiber and like the constant like chewing from highly fibrous foods kept our teeth straight throughout,
Right.
you know,
And
throughout evolution. But
less chewing may have
yeah,
caused it to get crooked.
Yeah, and yeah, weaker muscles, getting our teeth crooked. So I've read some cool research on that. But yeah, we've stripped the fiber from all our foods. It's just a fraction of what it was. Like if you look at any of the pictures of like wild corn versus current corn, or like what a banana looked like, or what any of these fruits and vegetables looked like before we started changing them to make them
Hmm.
taste better, look better,
Yeah.
less fiber. It's just a stark contrast. Um, so we're not getting the fuel for certain bacteria, hydrogen producing bacteria, to create hydrogen gas. We just don't get it anymore. And what this means is research is showing that upwards of 60 to 80% of middle-aged metabolically impaired people no longer even have the capability to make hydrogen gas when they're given non-nutritive carbohydrates, right? And
Mm.
this is because of dysbiosis, right? They've killed
Mhm.
off the bacteria that make hydrogen by not feeding any fiber, right? If they don't get any fuel, they die, right? So a lifetime of poor diet has made it so that even when people start making changes in middle age, when they get concerned, and maybe start eating more salads, more fibrous foods, right? They won't even produce hydrogen because they've killed off the bacteria. They produce methane instead. So we know that as breath methane rises and hydrogen drops, it's associated with all sorts of poor health outcomes. We also know that methane rises as we age and hydrogen drops as we age. But on the flip side, when we've looked at centenarians, so people 100 years old and older,
Mm.
such as in Okinawa, they have higher breath hydrogen than the average young person, right? So
Interesting.
could be
This is
tied to
the diet.
longevity. Yeah, their diet is high in fiber, and certain nutrients that have kept these bacteria
Mm.
alive. Um, so that's really interesting, and we've shown very strong results in our anti-aging trial. Giving the hydrogen tablets to the elderly. So the clinical benefits we've shown, we have 21 structure function claims in the US. We have 20 something clinical trials. We've shown weight loss across 5 or 6 studies now. We've showed improvements in exercise performance and recovery. We've shown improvements in brain metabolism. We've shown improvements in gut health. We've shown improvements in markers associated with aging. So the benefits are all across the board.
How does it
Like
work with aging? Just would be interested to know about that. Like,
yeah,
does it reduce lines in the body, or does it allow the, I don't know, collagen to work better or anything? Like, what type
well,
of
there,
age?
there is one study, this isn't on the tablets, but there is one study at a lower dose bathing in hydrogen water that reduced wrinkles. But ours are more like the biomarkers associated with aging. So we lengthen telomeres, right?
Mm.
We improve DNA methylation. We doubled this protein in the blood called TET2, TT2. If you've ever seen the research on, they call it like vampire research, where they take the blood of a young mouse and they put it into an old mouse and it
Yeah.
rejuvenates their skeletal tissue. That's linked to TET2. So we doubled TET2 in the blood. We improved brain metabolism in the elderly. Then we had some functional outcomes, like we lowered pain scores. We tended to improve some sleep outcomes, and we improved something called the senior fitness test. So, like how many times the elderly could sit and stand before they failed and were too
Mm.
tired to keep doing it. It actually went up in the hydrogen group. So the average age was like 77 or 78, and it was for 6 months during lockdowns of the pandemic. But somehow the hydrogen group got stronger and more fit, whereas the placebo group, of course, got weaker, as you'd expect, for older
Mhm.
people confined to their homes. So yeah, we've shown all sorts of benefits. It's again, when you understand how hydrogen works, as like exercise for the mitochondria, we know that exercise, if it was a drug, would be a miracle drug, like a panacea,
Yeah.
right? So hydrogen is sort of the same. I would say it's perhaps not as important as exercise, but right up there, right? We
Mhm.
need hydrogen to thrive. We don't necessarily need it to survive, but we need it to thrive.
Let me ask you, is there a maximum amount of hydrogen a person should have? And
So
are there age ranges in which a person can have hydrogen as well?
yeah, it's a great question. And we will find the optimal dosing in the future,
Mm.
but right now we don't have that nailed down yet. But what we do know is that in countless instances, we've needed a higher concentration or a higher dose to find an effect. But to date, in no instances has a lower dose been more effective than a higher dose. So we're still going up on that J curve. We haven't reached the plateau yet. Now, perhaps we are at a plateau in certain things. Like for exercise performance, it might take 1/10 the dose of, say, liver health, right? But to get to different tissues, you need more or less H2. So we might get a therapeutic dose at a lower dose for A and B, but we might need 10 times higher to affect C, D, E, and so on.
Okay.
So we need a lot more research in the future on this, but so far, what the research is showing is more is better, right?
Mm.
And that you want to do it intermittently. You don't want to be drinking hydrogen all day long, right? Just like you wouldn't want to exercise a little bit all day long, it wouldn't have the same effects. You want to hit it hard for a short period. You want to spike the concentration in your cells and then let them recover, right?
So would it matter? Would is that determined by the actual concentration? I'm guessing.
Well, yeah. So, for instance, concentration will determine dosage, concentration, and volume of water,
Right.
right? So, for instance, 1 ppm in 500 milliliters is only 0.5 milligrams, right, of hydrogen that you're getting. But if you're drinking 12 ppm in 500 milliliters, you're getting 6 milligrams of H2,
Mm.
right? So you're getting a 12 times higher dose. So the whole idea is the trend in the research shows that you want as high of a dose as you can in a short window, intermittently throughout the day. So no more than 2 to 3 times a day.
Can I ask quickly? Like, okay, so for instance, if you have an energy drink,
Yeah.
um, because of the caffeine, you'll stay stimulated for a certain period and it will slowly start to kind of taper off. Are there any spike in energy during the time of drinking hydrogen? And how long would it be sustained for if they were to have a spike in some sort of energy clearance or energy, sorry, mind clearance, like clear of mind fog or energy spike within yourself? Are there
Yeah,
any?
so actually, I forgot to mention this. Two of our clinical trials are head-to-head comparisons against caffeine after acute sleep deprivation, right?
Right?
So in the one trial, we showed equivalence to caffeine at raising alertness on the attention network test. Hydrogen affected orienting and caffeine affected alerting, which we know to be true about caffeine. So we did a follow-up clinical trial that was very well controlled. So there was one group that placebo, another group hydrogen plus placebo, another group caffeine plus placebo, and another group with hydrogen and caffeine to see about potential
Mhm.
synergies. And the hydrogen group and the hydrogen and caffeine group actually had more robust improvements in brain metabolism, creatine to choline ratios, right?
Mhm.
So hydrogen affected more regions of the brain than caffeine does. Now, in those trials, they didn't look at how long the effect lasted. Uh, Anecdotally, from testimonials and my experience, um, I'd say that it really depends on if you're tired, if you're sleep deprived, if you're hungover. Um, if you're just a little bit groggy, it lifts you up, and I find I have energy, all day long, right? Because I'm just like, it's corrected for half an hour too little of sleep, and I just feel good. But if I have only gotten like 3 hours of sleep and I'm flying across the world or, had a little bit too much wine the night before, it lasts like 2 or 3 hours, right? And then I start feeling bad.
Mm. And what did you notice from the caffeine and hydrogen group? Did you say like how what
Yeah.
was that a
So it,
brain
it also it,
performance?
it also was a more robust improvement in brain metabolism. There's some potential synergy right there. What again I noticed anecdotally and what we've heard from a lot is it it definitely curbs the caffeine crash and it gets rid of the jitteriness. of
Mm,
caffeine. It kind of rounds out your energy to feel little bit more natural.
right. Not gonna lie, before going to the gym, I always have hydrogen, but I'll mix it with a pre-workout, and then I feel bulletproof. Not
Yeah,
gonna lie. I
yeah,
don't have any sort of don't know if the mic is making a bit of noise. Um, lactic acid. Lactic acid just gets deleted, and just sustained energy during training. I feel great, but it could be.
yeah. I mean, there's systematic reviews showing that anti-fatigue effects of H2 in new clinical trials we have coming out. We've shown to blunt the rise in creatine kinase and myoglobin, so muscle damage as well as improving functional assets like body composition. We improve body composition in elite Olympic level athletes, right? In a trial in Russia, actually, in just a month. So it was a slight increase in muscle mass and a slight decrease in fat that hit statistical equivalent. So pretty interesting that we were able to improve body comp in elite athletes like this. But
Right.
in that group, it also showed the anti-fatigue effects. It showed they improved performance in the hydrogen group. It blunted the rise in creatine kinase, which is a marker of muscle damage.
Right.
Um, so there's yeah, all sorts of benefits there. And yeah, I do the same as you too, by the way. I add my hydrogen in with some nitrosogene, which is a patented form of arginine, and caffeine, and then I take, I'd say, 50 or 60 other pills and tablets in my morning supplement routine along with it. So
Little concoction. That's cool.
yeah,
It's got to be done. I
yeah,
like. I mean, you started off with pretty much a home lab experiment when you came up with the hydrogen yourself. So you can't just stop there.
yeah.
I wanted to say, so yeah, so I've known of hydrogen to be quite amazing, and when I came across your company, I was really impressed. Especially with all the research which you had done, and continue to do to prove its efficacy. Now, since that time, there's been a lot of changes and innovations, some of which have been um, travel bottles, like hydrogen
Mm, yeah.
travel bottles. A lot of people are speaking about it. And people, what I'm hearing is that it's of great quality and that it can produce a good amount of hydrogen, and that these sealed bottles um, allows you to sip hydrogen throughout the day and still keep the same concentration. So, from what you understand with your studies and the efficacy of your product in comparison, what would you say about these bottles that people are selling?
So first and foremost, they're better than the ionizer machines, like the one that I bought for $5,000, and they're a lot cheaper.
Right.
But they are delivering a fraction of the dose that the tablets are, right? For instance, the best machines in the market advertise 4 to 5 ppm, and they're usually in 250 milliliter containers, right? So at 4 ppm and 250, that's a milligram of hydrogen. So if you drink one of the flasks,
Mm.
and chug it, you're getting 1/6 the dose as putting a tablet. Yeah. So it's a much smaller effect. Now, the big issue that I find with them is one, the advice that they're telling people to sip on it all day long. We know that's not how hydrogen works, right? So you don't want to sip on it all day long. You want these intermittent blasts of high doses of hydrogen into your system to raise your cellular concentration. And two, if they're saying that the concentration will stay all day because it's sealed in a bottle, as you sip, there's headspace being created. And hydrogen will dissipate into the headspace from a 2 hour half-life. So if you're at 4 ppm and you drink half of it, and then 2 hours later you open and drink another half, that second half will only be 2 ppm, right? Because half of it will have gone into the headspace. The next big issue with the machines is they won't get the 4 to 5 ppm forever, right? Because how they're doing this is they're pressurizing the container under something called Henry's law. So there's two ways to get the higher concentration of H2. It's either the very small gas bubbles like we're making,
Mhm.
right? Or Henry's law, with time and pressure to hit equilibrium. So to get to 5 ppm, you need about 65 psi of pressure, right? To pressurize that container.
Right.
Now, this is an issue because typically the gaskets that are being used in these bottles are only rated to 30 to 40 psi, right? And I know because I've gone down routes trying to make containment flasks and everything for research, and they start blowing. The gaskets start blowing, which means they separate and allow gas to leak out.
Mhm.
So over time, sometime within days, usually within weeks or within a couple months, anyways, these bottles will stop pressurizing because the gasket has separated slightly to allow pressure release. So you're not going to get the 4 to 5, you're maybe going to get one, right? So now that 1 milligram dose, you're maybe at a 0.25 milligram dose, right? So you're getting 1/24th what a tablet would. Whereas a tablet, you get the same concentration and dose every time, so long as you make it the same. If you put it in room temperature water, 500 milliliters of water, you drop it in, you're going to get the same concentration every time. Now, the final concern I have with the bottles is just the lack of testing on them. So with the supplement, with the tablets, we have to go through the FDA because we manufacture in the US now. We have self-affirmed GRAS, we have new dietary ingredient status with the FDA. Every batch is tested, for contaminants. But with the bottles, they're predominantly all made in China and they're a consumer device, right? So they're not a medical device or a consumer device, which means they don't have to undergo any testing. So they don't have any testing to show if they're leaching any contaminants into the water, right? What the parts are made of,
I mean, if it's
right? So
understood that you're going to put water in there, I thought that, it'd have to
no,
undergo some kind of testing.
no,
So what is it because it's optional for you to put water in there? Is that what they're going under? Like,
no, there's just no regulations, right? To do that. So there might be a list of like banned materials that you put in something for human consumption, but there's a lot of chemistry going on here and moving parts, right? So I know there's been concerns with the bottles about potential like PFASs, right, in there. Some of them are using plastic that isn't BPA free, so there could be, BPA and microplastics and everything getting into your water. Um, the ones made out of glass are actually dangerous because you don't want to pressurize glass; it can explode,
hmm.
right? And if there's a tiny little crack in, and then you pressurize it again, it can go off like a grenade, in your kitchen. So yeah, there's a lot of little concerns about the units. Again, they're better than a lot of the other alternatives on the market, but they're still a fraction of the dosage of what the tablets give,
Hmm.
right? With much less testing for safety, without the clinical evidence, without any of these, you know, uh, confirmations that the tablets have for safety and efficacy.
Mm. And what is what is a therapeutic dosage? Because there's mixed reviews on that. I've heard that so many times. Oh, you only need 1 ppm. Like, what does the evidence say?
The evidence says that the minimum observed therapeutic dose of H2 ever seen would be zero point 0.5 milligrams, right? So that would be, you know, 1 ppm in 500 milliliters. Now these machines will give often 1 ppm in 250 milliliters. So you'd have to drink two in a row for the minimum observed therapeutic threshold. That's just to show a physiological effect in the body, right? Like you're going to see a physiological effect, you know, doing some jumping jacks for 5 minutes. That doesn't mean that's the optimal dose of exercise, right?
Mhm.
So we start to see good trends in exercise performance, at the 1 to 2 milligrams of H2, right? Um, but for liver health, we might need 10, right? So, we can convert this from rodent research, as best we can. So rodents drink a lot more water, like 12 times the water per body weight as humans, and they'll get it for all their water all day long. They drink in a tight window, which means if you're drinking 1 liter of water a day when you should be drinking four, you're only drinking 1 liter of hydrogen, you're actually getting 1/48 times the dose that a mouse would get. And if you're drinking 500 milliliters a day, you're getting 1/96th of the dose if you're having the same concentration. So a lot of these arguments that, oh, you only need this is because of, look at all the miraculous effects in mice at these lower concentrations. But they're drinking so much more per body weight than we are. The only way we can bridge that gap is by increasing the concentration.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. I guess I get that I guess that's settled then, really.
Yeah.
Um, do you think there's any bridge to between hydrogen and bottles in the future? You said you'd looked into it. Do you think it's something you might look further into, or you're just like, no, do you know what? It doesn't make sense. I'll just stick with.
Yeah, I'm keeping my eye on the technologies that come
Mhm.
out. I think there will be better technologies constantly coming through in the future,
Right,
right? Down the road, sometime there might be machines that can produce the same or similar doses consistently as the tablets. It just would take some unique engineering.
right.
So I had developed containment bottles, right, that could get 12 ppm of dissolved H2. Now I needed about 140 psi of pressure, and I got like industrial grade gaskets and parts and everything on the machine. These machines cost me thousands of dollars per prototype. I made, I think, 5 or 7 prototypes,
Wow.
and they worked a few times.
Oh my
All of the machines broke in
God.
less than 10 uses. And that was hiring an engineering firm with the sole purpose of knowing we had to get this high, PSI pressure, right? So what we're finding is a lot of these gaskets that are rated for the high pressure, they will be rated and they might keep that pressure for years, right? Before they fail, right? Like many
Mm.
years. But it's like the hammer effect, right? Like you blow up to that pressure and then you do it again and then again and then again. And each time it's like a pounding effect on the gasket. So
Mhm.
that's why after a certain amount of uses,
It's going to be compromised.
it's gonna, yeah,
Mm. Let's move on slightly. I want to talk about um, another ingredient which you use called GAA,
yeah.
which is in a different product, which is called Prime. Prime is, well, I use it as an intra workout. I think you can use it pre-workout as well. I'm not sure.
Post workout, really any time of day, because most of the ingredients are you need to load with anyways.
Mhm.
So, it doesn't really matter when you take it,
Yeah, I'll
as long as you
I love
take it
it.
every day.
I'll drink it on days off. I'm like, do you know what?
Yeah,
Just gonna have that, especially as I intermittent fast a lot of the time, and it's
yeah,
got HMB, which is anti-catabolic, and creatine in there, so it helps to, load up the body with creatine. But yeah, GAA is one fascinating ingredient in there, and what makes me think about that as well is that there is another new kid on the block called creatine.
yeah,
And I don't know if it's too early to jump into creatine because first of all, it'd be good to talk about GAA and what it is, how it works in the body. But lots of people have been talking about creatine, and I thought this sounds interesting. It sounds quite similar to GAA, but I don't understand the science too much to make too much of a direct comparison. So I thought perhaps you'd be the guy to give me your views on that. A lot of people have
yeah.
spoken about creatine and saying that it is far better than creatine by itself. So,
Yeah, so
yeah.
that's what the research is showing, right? And first, what GAA is, guanidinoacetic acid, is a precursor to creatine that converts to creatine in the body, right? And we've been discovering in the research that GAA actually leads to higher levels of creatine, in our tissue than creatine itself. and especially in the brain, because creatine has a really hard time getting to the brain, but GAA doesn't, and then converts to creatine inside our brain. So there's a lot of advantages to GAA. Now, the reason that GAA wasn't widely used in supplements, it's been used for livestock to put on mass for 70 years, right? But it hasn't been used so much in humans because GAA on its own raises homocysteine. Now, homocysteine is an amino acid that needs to be broken down to produce other chemicals in the body. It gets broken down by B vitamins. But if elevated, can lead to neurological issues, brain issues, like heart issues, all sorts of things. So you don't want to elevate your homocysteine. Now, and creatine doesn't elevate homocysteine, it actually drops it. So recently researchers, the same researchers that both the Drink HRW team works with and the creatine people work with, um, have been discovering that by combining creatine and GAA together into a formulation that either has B vitamins or something like trimethylglycine or betaine, which lowers homocysteine, you get the same effects of giving just GAA without the homocysteine raising effects, right? So gets rid of the side effects. And that's kind of GAA in a nutshell. Now, what creatine is and how it differs from the creatine and GAA in Prime is only a couple subtle things, right? Creatine is just a branded ingredient that's a combination of creatine monohydrate and GAA, right? On Prime, the Drink HRW team and myself opted not to work with the branded creatine and to work with the professor that has the pending patents directly, Professor Olsich, for a few key reasons. One is the research is split, even from Professor Olsich's team. Sometimes they use 2 grams of creatine and 2 grams of GAA, and sometimes they use 3 grams of creatine and 2 grams of GAA, right? So creatine did a 50-50 split. They're 2 and 2, 2 grams of creatine, 2 grams GAA. Our team thought, well, when there's a lower and a higher dose that are both showing effects, we want to err on the side of making sure this is effective and go with the higher dose, right? And that's how the regulators think too. You can't make the claims on clinical trials if your dose is lower, but you can make the claims if your dose is higher,
Mhm.
right? So with the combination of 3 and 2, we have a higher amount of claims because we have a higher total dose, right?
Mhm.
In addition, the creatine people are recommending B vitamins, right? Now, B vitamins will work better, independently than trimethylglycine to lower homocysteine. But you can do that math, and we know that we have enough trimethylglycine and creatine because they both have lowering effects, so that there's no rise. The difference is with trimethylglycine or betaine anhydrous by another name, it actually has a huge body of evidence showing improvements in body composition, increased muscle mass, decreased fat mass. So when we're developing a product like Prime, that is to retain muscle mass, right? To put on muscle mass, especially for men as they age, right? And help with this purpose, why not use the ingredient that compounds the effects rather than ingredients that only serve the homocysteine purpose? So we just redrew, we did basically the same thing as the creatine people, but we just had a different way of looking at it, right?
Mhm.
And came to different conclusions on how to solve these issues.
And you've got other supporting ingredients as well for guys who are of a higher age to sustain testosterone levels and um, muscle, holding on muscle, like muscle support and that sort of thing. Um, Creatine, is there much research which is on that?
Well,
Have,
creatine uses the same research that we use, except they can only use about half of it, right? Because with the creatine, they're using the 2 grams creatine and the 2 grams GAA, which about half the research used that dosage, but the other half uses 3 grams creatine and 2 grams GAA. So in most markets, they can't legally market that other half of the research because their dose is lower. But
Mhm.
ours, because our dose is equivalent, we can market both halves.
Right, right. I get you. And is it okay for women to use the Prime product?
Yeah, I mean, there's no ingredient in Prime that isn't good for women,
Yeah.
and women have the same issue as men do in declining mass as they age,
Mhm.
right? And I mean, nobody wants to get weak and frail.
No, no, no. Do you know what? I think I covered everything I needed to cover, you know. Those are the main things. So thank you so much, man. Thank you so much. So
Yeah.
what's next on the horizon for Drink HRW?
For Drake HRW, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure that they've got me booked on some podcasts coming up. I think it's just business as usual for them. I don't know if they're developing new products or
Oh,
not. Maybe, I floated a bunch of ideas uh, for them. I think the next thing is they're going to add another really cool ingredient to Harmony on the next production run. So it'll be in addition to the Immuno LP20 and the H2, there's going to be one other thing in there. I think that's next on the horizon. Um, there's been some internal talk about developing like sleep health products, right? And maybe some metabolic products, but I don't know any timelines on that. They gotta talk to me and the scientific advisory board to help them formulate when they need to.
yeah, yeah. Well, look, man, you're doing a great job. You've done a fantastic job over the years. And the fact that you stepped down from CEO makes sense. Like you put a lot of work in and now you need some time for yourself. But
Yeah, yeah, and to do what I find more fun. I find it a lot more fun to pursue the research and like work with the professors and also to I think I told you about it. I have this hydrogen inhalation unit that I've been working on with one of the top professors in the world for about 7 years. And we're getting close to market. So the big issue on hydrogen inhalation is there's machines that are effective and there's machines that are safe, but there's no machine on the market that's both safe and effective, right? The ones that are effective come with explosion risks, right? And the ones that are safe are ineffective dosages, right? Um, so it took us some pretty novel engineering. We have some pending patents on it, and we've developed a machine that is both safe and effective, right? That gives your whole breathing rate of H2 at 4% gas, wearing a mask. So we've actually gone through several sets of prototypes, and we're finalizing design and moving forward to like the beta testing that we're going to be sending to our worldwide distribution and influencers and stuff to give feedback. And we're hoping to launch um, in 2025. And I'm going to do everything in my power to launch in 2025 because I've already got a booth booked at Tim Gray's Health Optimization Summit in Austin when they come to the US. So
oh,
that's next March or April. So, we need to be on the market by then because I've already put my deposit in.
right, right. Oh, that's exciting stuff. So there is something potentially working on then,
Yeah.
provided it all goes to plan. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exciting. Well, would you be giving updates on the website at all of that, or would it be on the Instagram page? Well, you probably don't really have much to do with that.
Yeah.
You're not managing that, are you? So
So I've got a newsletter on alextarnava.com that I'll go out to. I mean, Drink HRW will be one of the first distributors of the machine when it hits market. So I'm sure they'll blast everyone too, and it'll be on their Instagram. So
I can't wait. I can't wait. I want to be one of the first to test it out when it's available.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure. You've shared some really great, interesting golden nuggets, which I'm sure a lot of people can take away. Your products is the creme de la creme, the leading hydrogen water brand as far as I'm concerned, regardless how many generators and special bottles come out on the market. Drink HRW is probably the only one with the most amount of science-backed research and the clinical trials and meta-analysis and everything attached to it. So thank you very
Yeah.
much for all the work that you do. And I look forward to having another conversation with you in the future.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah,
Amazing.
thanks for having me on again.
Anytime, anytime. Well, you have a great day and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, you too.
Take care.